This is Sarah Wilkinson from Humber College and the University of Guelph Humber, and in this video I'm going to talk about what adenosine triphosphate is. So it's going to be an introduction to ATP. In a previous video I covered what enzymes are, so I would encourage you to make sure you watch that video before continuing on. And in this video I'm going to cover what we need energy for in the body, what ATP is, how ATP stores energy, how that energy is released, and how ATP is reformed. So the first thing we're going to cover is, what do we need ATP for? Well, we can really think about ATP being the energy currency that our body needs for many cellular reactions. So what this means is it's pretty much the only molecule that our body can use for energy. So it can't just take the food that we eat and directly use it in cellular metabolism. It has to be first converted to ATP. And so some of these things that our body has to be able to do, it has to be able to produce some force and movement, and we'll see this in muscle cells. It's going to be involved in active transport, so moving things up a gradient. So an example of this is your sodium-potassium pump. And finally, we need ATP to be able to build molecules. So if we want to make new proteins or new phospholipid membranes, all that requires ATP. So pretty much anything our body needs and our cells needs to be able to do, we are going to need energy. And the only molecule, and there's a little exception to this, but really the primary currency is adenosine triphosphate. And so what is adenosine triphosphate? We hear a lot about it in biology. Well, what it is it's a molecule of adenine. And for those of you who are familiar with your genetics, you'll recognize this molecule. You've got a molecule of adenine, and attached to it is a molecule of ribose, which is a sugar. So anything ever ending in ose is going to be a sugar molecule. Those two molecules combined we call adenosine. So adenosine is a combination of adenine and ribose. And attached to adenosine, you have three inorganic phosphate molecules. So phosphate is actually PO4, the chemical molecule, but I'm just going to abbreviate here as phosphate, just as a P. And so your adenosine triphosphate has 1, 2, 3 tri. Stored in these chemical bonds between phosphate and adenosine is energy. So that when one of these bonds is broken, energy will be released. And so when this happens, you're left with adenosine diphosphate, 2 phosphate groups plus an extra phosphate floating out in the cytosol. And that releases energy. So this is what our body does on a regular basis. You'll often see in your textbooks or in your class notes, instead of the whole molecule looking like this, you'll see ATP gets converted or gets hydrolyzed to ADP and inorganic phosphate. And so when we talk about hydrolysis, this is the breakdown in the presence of water. So if something's hydrolyzed, it's broken down in the presence of water, and that's exactly what happens to ATP, because your cell is really composed of a huge proportion of water. As I explained in a previous video, all chemical reactions within the body have an enzyme associated with it that speed it up. When we're looking at the breakdown of ATP or hydrolysis of ATP, we're talking about ATPases. Now there's a bunch of different ones. So for example, myosin ATPase is going to be an enzyme associated with the muscle protein called myosin, and this is involved in muscle contractions, which need ATP. Your calcium ATPase is going to be involved with calcium pumps, pumping calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. There's all sorts of other ATPases, but generally what ATPases do is they hydrolyze, break down ATP, adenosine triphosphate, down to adenosine diphosphate to release energy. Why do we need to continuously make ATP? Is that there's real storage limitation within cells. We can only store minimal amounts, maybe 1 to 2 minute supply, depending on the ATP demands of the cell, sometimes less. So therefore, if we want to continue to live, for our cells to continue functioning, we have to be able to continuously make new ATP. And in upcoming videos, I'm going to talk about multiple pathways that we can make ATP. So some of you have probably heard about glycolysis. Some of you have probably heard about electron transport chain. That's what we're talking about. There's lots of different ways ATP can be used. But the bottom line is we have to continuously make ATP in order to do cellular work. So really what we're going to talk about in future videos is how we take the food stuff we eat, so carbohydrates, fat, and protein, whether it's coming in through our digestive system or from storage organs such as the liver, how we harness and take the energy in the chemical bonds of these molecules and convert it to the chemical bonds in adenosine triphosphate. That's what we're going to be talking about in the next few videos. And really, what do we need this energy for? Well, we need it to be able to do physiological functions as well as produce heat. There are two ways in which we can make ATP. One is anaerobic and the other is aerobic. And when we're talking about anaerobic mechanisms, it means without oxygen. So it means these mechanisms do not require oxygen to function. The first one we're going to cover is the phosphagen system, which is going to use as a substrate creatine phosphate. The next one after that we're going to talk about is anaerobic glycolysis, meaning glycolysis without oxygen. And the substrates are glucose and glycogen. Finally, we're going to talk about aerobic mechanisms where oxygen is required. Specifically, this is called oxidative phosphorylation. And this is the only mechanism by which fat and protein can be used to make ATP. So all three macronutrients, fat, carbohydrate, or protein, can be used to make ATP with oxidative phosphorylation. Anaerobic methods, you can only use creatine phosphate or your carbohydrate sources. So as a quick summary, ATP is made up of adenine, ribose, and 3 phosphate groups. Energy is stored within chemical bonds of ATP. During cellular work, energy is released from the breakdown of ATP. And because we're continually using energy, ATP has to be continually synthesized. And the way this is done is energy is transferred from other macronutrients or macromolecules, carbohydrates, fat, and proteins, to form ATP via several different pathways. These 3 pathways I'm going to cover in upcoming videos. The first one's going to be the phosphagen system. Before I move on to anaerobic glycolysis and oxidative phosphorylation, I'll have to cover a little bit about oxidation and reduction reaction because those are used in glycolysis and oxidative phosphorylation.